Alara lived her life by the rhythms of the river. It was a quiet existence, tucked away in a cabin that leaned into the shoulder of an ancient forest. She was a solitary woman, not by choice but by the slow erosion of circumstance. The world had taken her husband and her daughter, leaving behind only silence and the steady companionship of the pines. Her routine was a simple, deliberate thing, a bulwark against memory. She chopped wood, tended her small garden, and walked the worn path along the water's edge, a ghost in her own life. The forest, however, had begun to feel different. For weeks, a subtle disquiet had settled into the landscape. It started with sounds. At dusk, a deep, resonant call would echo from the high ridges, a sound that was not bear nor wolf. It was a sound of profound loneliness, a bass note that vibrated in her chest and made the glass in her window panes tremble. Then came the feeling of being watched. While weeding her garden or hanging laundry, the hairs on her arms would rise. She would turn, expecting to see a deer, but find only the dense, unblinking green of the tree-line. She tried to dismiss it. Grief, she told herself, was a phantom that played tricks on the senses. It could make the wind sound like a voice and the shadows look like figures. But the physical signs were harder to ignore. One morning, she found a series of massive footprints pressed deep into the muddy riverbank, each one twice the length of her own foot, with 5 distinct, powerful toes. Another time, a thick branch on an oak tree, far too high for her to reach, was snapped cleanly in two. She told herself it was the wind, a freak current, anything but the impossible truth that her mind was beginning to form. The truth arrived with the storm. It came without warning, a furious torrent of rain that turned the sky a bruised purple. The river, usually a placid companion, became a churning, angry thing. It swelled over its banks, clawing at the earth and pulling at the roots of ancient trees. Alara stood at her window, watching the water rise, a cold dread seeping into her bones. It was a familiar fear, the fear of water that takes without asking. Then she heard it. Over the roar of the storm, a sound that did not belong. A scream. It was thin and reedy, the sound of a child's terror, and it was nearly swallowed by the gale. Her heart stopped. It was a sound she had not heard in years, a sound she thought she would never hear again outside of her own nightmares. She did not hesitate. She pulled on her worn boots, grabbed a heavy oilskin coat, and plunged into the maelstrom. She ran toward the sound, toward the raging river. Rain lashed at her face, and the wind tore at her coat. The forest floor was a treacherous soup of mud and slick leaves. She followed the desperate cries, pushing through whipping branches and stumbling over unseen roots. Every part of her screamed for the child, a desperate prayer fueled by the memory of the one she had lost. She broke through the last line of trees and skidded to a halt at the river's edge. The sight stole the breath from her lungs. A small girl, no older than 7, was in the water. She was clinging to a splintered log that bucked and spun in the violent current. Her small face was white with terror, her cries lost in the roar. But that was not what made Alara freeze. That was not the impossible thing. In the river, standing waist-deep in the deadly torrent, was a creature. It was immense, a towering figure covered in thick, matted fur the color of wet earth and pine needles. Its shoulders were broad and powerful, its arms long and corded with muscle. It moved with a slow, deliberate strength against the current that threatened to sweep it away. It was a thing of legend, a nightmare whispered around campfires, and it was reaching for the child. Fear, primal and absolute, seized Alara. Her mind screamed at her to run, to hide, to flee from the monster in the water. It was a beast, an unknown force of nature, and it was near a helpless child. But then another feeling, deeper and more powerful than fear, rose to meet it. It was the fierce, aching protectiveness of a mother, an instinct that had lain dormant for years but had never truly died. She saw not just a monster, but a child in peril, and someone, was trying to help. The creature fought the river. It braced its powerful legs against the submerged rocks, each step a titanic effort. The water surged around it, but it did not yield. It reached the log, its massive, dark hand closing gently around the girl's small arm. The girl flinched, but did not scream again. She was too exhausted, too cold. The creature carefully pulled her free from the log and cradled her against its broad chest, turning its body to shield her from the full force of the current. Alara watched, mesmerized by the terrible, beautiful scene. This was not the act of a mindless beast. This was a rescue. The creature began its slow, arduous journey back to the bank, its huge form a bastion against the flood. It moved with a purpose that was entirely focused on the small, fragile life it held. When it finally reached the shallows, it stumbled, its immense strength clearly spent. It waded onto the muddy bank and gently, so gently, laid the little girl on a patch of moss. The child was still. Her eyes were closed, her skin a pale, bluish white. The creature stood over her, its great chest heaving as it drew in ragged breaths. Water streamed from its dark fur. It looked down at the child, and a sound escaped its throat, a low, guttural rumble of what sounded like distress. Alara's fear had vanished, replaced by a wave of raw, aching empathy. The instinct to help, to heal, was overwhelming. She took a step forward. The creature's head snapped up. Its eyes, deep-set and dark, locked onto hers. They were not the eyes of an animal. They held a startling intelligence, a profound wariness, and a flicker of something she recognized. Exhaustion. It let out another low rumble, a clear warning this time. It shifted its massive body, partially blocking her path to the child. It was a silent challenge. A test. Alara stopped. She held up her hands, palms open, showing she held no weapon. She did not try to force her way past. She understood. This being, this impossible guardian, was protecting its charge. It did not know her intentions. She met its gaze directly, trying to pour all of her own desperate hope and gratitude into her expression. She looked from the creature to the unmoving child, then back again. Her heart hammered against her ribs, but she held her ground. She took one deliberate step backward, giving it space. It was the right choice. The creature watched her, its head tilted slightly. The tension in its powerful shoulders seemed to lessen. It studied her for a long, silent moment, the rain plastering its fur to its form. Then, with a slow, considered movement, it stepped aside. It granted her access. It was a gesture of trust so profound it made her want to weep. She rushed to the child's side, kneeling in the mud. The little girl was not breathing. Panic, cold and sharp, pierced Alara. But her training, years old from a life she no longer had, took over. She tilted the girl's head back, cleared her airway, and began to press on her small chest. She breathed into the child's mouth, once, twice. The creature stood a few feet away, a silent, looming sentinel, watching her every move. "Come on," Alara whispered, the words a raw plea to the universe. "Breathe." She worked, her movements sure and steady, a desperate rhythm against the drumming of the rain. The world narrowed to the small, still form beneath her hands. She felt a presence at her back, immense and warm, and smelled the scent of wet earth and pine. The creature had moved closer. It knelt beside her, a mountain of quiet solidarity. It made a soft, clicking sound with its throat, a sound of encouragement. Suddenly, the child sputtered. A violent cough racked her small frame, and she expelled a gush of river water. She gasped, a ragged, beautiful intake of air, and then began to cry, a weak, mewling sound. Relief washed over Alara so powerfully her legs gave out. She sat back in the mud, pulling the shivering child into her arms, wrapping her in her own coat. She looked up. The creature was still there, its dark eyes fixed on the crying girl. It reached out a massive hand, its fingers thick as branches, and gently touched the child's hair, a gesture of incredible tenderness. Alara did not flinch. She understood this touch. It was a confirmation, a shared moment of success. The creature looked at her then. It held her gaze, and in the depths of its eyes, she saw an ancient sadness, a wisdom that felt as old as the forest itself. It gave a slow, deliberate nod. A deep, resonant sound rumbled in its chest, not a growl of warning, but a sigh of finality. It rose to its full, staggering height and turned, pointing a long arm through the trees, in the direction of the distant town lights. The message was clear. Take her home. It took a few steps back, its movements no longer weary but fluid and sure. It was retreating to its own world, leaving hers behind. Before the shadows of the forest swallowed it completely, It paused and looked back one last time. It looked at Alara, and it looked at the child nestled in her arms. It was a final, silent acknowledgement, a shared secret between three souls on a riverbank in a storm. Then, it turned and melted into the trees. It was gone. Alara was alone again, but the world was irrevocably changed. The silence that descended was different now. It was not empty. It was filled with the weight of what she had seen. She lifted the small girl into her arms and began the long walk back toward the town. Her mind was a whirlwind of impossible thoughts. It was not a monster. It was a guardian, a protector. It felt loss and compassion. It understood sacrifice. The edge of town was a chaos of flashing lights and frantic voices. Search parties were gathering. When she emerged from the trees, carrying the lost child, a collective gasp went through the crowd. The girl's parents rushed forward, crying, sweeping their daughter into their arms. Questions came at Alara from all sides. Where did you find her? What happened? She looked from their frightened, confused faces to the dark tree line behind her. She could have lied. She could have said she found the girl washed ashore, a simple, believable story. But she could not. It would have been a betrayal of the trust she had been given on that riverbank. So, she told them the truth. She told them everything. She described the creature, its size, its power, its gentleness. She told them how it had waded into the flood, how it had rescued the child and laid her on the shore. She told them how it had watched over them, a silent partner in saving a life. They stared at her. They saw a reclusive woman, a woman known for her tragedy, babbling a mad story. Disbelief hardened their faces. The town sheriff put a gentle hand on her arm, his expression full of pity. He thought her grief had finally broken her. They thanked her for finding the girl, but her story was dismissed as a fantasy, a trauma-induced delusion. But the next morning, a search party went back to the river. They followed Alara's directions, seeking to recover the girl's lost shoe. And there, in the drying mud, they found the proof. 2 sets of prints, side by side. One set was small and bare, the footprints of a terrified child. The other set was enormous, deep, and utterly inhuman. They followed the tracks from the river's edge to the exact spot Alara had described, and then back to the impassable darkness of the ancient woods. The sheriff stood over the prints, his face pale. The town's quiet certainty was shattered. The evidence was undeniable, irrefutable. They looked at each other, the same stunned expression on every face. The impossible story of the grieving hermit was true. The whole town was left in a state of silent, bewildered awe. They had lived their entire lives beside a mystery, and it had taken a lost child and a heartbroken woman to reveal it. They never spoke of it openly again. It became a quiet, unspoken legend, a story that settled deep into the town's bones. A new respect, bordering on reverence, was given to the vast, dark woods that bordered their lives. As for Alara, she returned to her cabin by the river. Her solitude was no longer a cage of grief, but a perch of witness. She was the keeper of a sacred truth. She lived out her days in the quiet rhythm of the water, alone, but knowing, with absolute certainty, that she was not the only one watching over the river. The forest was never the same again. It was no longer just a place, but a presence.